Welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. I'm Kate Dickerson. Today's episode is a conversation I had with Bob Duchesne, who is an avid birder and who has taken that lifelong passion and made it into one of many careers he has had. As you'll hear in our conversation, I have very little knowledge of birding, but Bob's exuberance and enjoyment of birding is truly contagious, and it was great to hear how much he has learned about birds in Maine and what it means to him. I've included links to the videos and websites we talked about in the show notes. Our conversation was recorded in December 2025. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Today's episode is supported by Maine Technology Institute. MTI is celebrating 25 years of making grants, loans, and equity investments to businesses, organizations, and entrepreneurs to strengthen Maine's innovation economy. Bob, welcome to the Maine Science Podcast. You are one of my guests that I have been a fan of from afar for a while. And I would argue not a typical Maine Science Podcast guest in that, from what I can tell, you haven't been trained as a scientist like many of my guests have been. But I would absolutely argue deep in the world of science in your chosen area of expertise of birding. So I thought it would be really fun for people to hear your background and how you ended up becoming, for all intents and purposes, the go-to bird guy, from what I can tell.
Yeah, my life up to this point has been a total accident. I've been through several careers and I got into all of them accidentally. Birding is something that happened to me in first grade. So I've had that lifelong passion, and it started when goldfinches came out on the lawn, and I was just able to stand up on my tiptoes and look out the window and see all this yellow on the sea of grassy green, and I was just entranced, and I have been ever since.
That is actually super interesting that's how you got into birding, but it sounds like it's always been a passion and an interest, but not something you necessarily thought you could pursue as a career.
Right. Obviously, I have a lot of other passions too, and I get into all those accidentally. My longest career was in radio. I was a morning announcer in, several different places, but mostly Bangor for 17 years. And then went back and did some more. I've got a YouTube channel now, so I've been entranced by media as well, but not to the extent that I got hooked on birds.
So, okay, 6, 7 years old?
Yeah, about that.
Depending on when you were in first grade. So walk me through, how did you keep going with the birding, and how did you keep going with that from seeing a sea of yellow that you knew wasn't flowers but was in fact goldfinches? How have you continued following that?
I think probably the salient point is that I didn't know another birder until I got to college. So this was all self-inflicted. You know, when I was 7 years old, I was also interested in catching fish. Then along comes sports and girls and things later on in life. So I had some other competing passions as well. And then I went off my career. And a lot of people who get into birding later on go through the same process where they don't really get hooked on it again until later on in life. But I was hooked all the way through. I just didn't even have binoculars until I got out of college. So it sort of came on me gradually. I worked in Washington, D.C. in radio, and then came back to help start a radio station in Brewer, actually. And I immediately got hooked up with Maine Audubon, the local chapter, and started doing everything with them. And one thing led to another, so I sort of explored the entire state, got deeply into birding, and have been passionate about it ever since the middle 1980s.
So walk me through how you would introduce someone into birding who has a slight interest but has no idea where to start.
Yeah, I think it's intimidating because it looks complicated. And probably about the time I hit 55 or 60, I said, wait a minute. It looks complicated because that's the way I've been making it my whole life. There's just a whole lot of clues that birds spin off, and people will tell you what they are, the experts will. And it gets overwhelming very quickly, especially when there's a lot of birds all singing at once. So it sort of became my mission, I think, from about 15, 20 years, 20 years ago at least, to say, no, this is actually much simpler than it looks. We're just thinking too much about it. And so that has sort of been the focus of my last couple of decades, is making this just easier for everybody because it is actually pretty accessible.
Yeah, I find myself, and I don't know if it's my age or just the need to generally slow down, but I find myself becoming more and more entranced when I'm out and about hiking and things, just taking a minute and listening more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even going to go as far as saying, trying to recognize different bird calls and stuff, because I actually think that requires a level of musicality that I just do not have in me. Maybe I'm wrong, but my family will argue that I am not.
I have no musicality ability at all, so.
So you don't find that as something that hinders you in recognizing bird songs and other things?
No, And there's probably not much noise a bird can make in the state of Maine that I won't know right away. But that didn't happen right away. It took me years. And so the first piece of advice I give to everybody when it comes to recognizing by sight or sound is that the most common birds are the most common. The ones that are around your house making all the noise. There's only 10 of them, probably. There's more than that around the house, but only 10 of them are making most of the noise. Go find them, figure them out, get used to them. And then you just keep adding on over time. Wherever you go, up to camp, golfing, local park, you can get familiar with a few more birds. And then after you've got those down reasonably well, go to someplace more exotic, like along the coast in Acadia or up in the North Woods or out to marshes that are right in the local area and get used to some of the birds there. And you pick it up surprisingly quickly when you parse it out like that. Do the common ones first, you pick up the difficult ones later.
Do you find that if you go places other than Maine, you find yourself kind of trying to figure out the same idea? What are the common birds in this area that I can identify for, the 5 days I'm here or whatever it is?
Absolutely. Of course, at this stage of my life, I know what I'm after. There's a bunch of birds I haven't seen before. I know who they are and have a pretty good idea where they are, so I'll go seek them out. But one of the things I like about going somewhere different is I'm not an expert there. I actually have to work at it. In Maine, I do recognize just about everything I hear, but you take me out to Oregon or Arizona, and I got to work my butt off to say, okay, I think I know what that is. It sounds a little like a bird I'm familiar with. I can probably remember it, but maybe not. I spent 2 weeks in Arizona last year, and it was like being a beginner again, which felt great.
I was going to say that actually must have been really satisfying.
It is. I joke about it, but when you have a life list of birds you've seen, you've had most of the discoveries and the new birds that you're ever going to have. So it's just sort of revisiting old ground, but you don't have that excitement of saying, oh my God, a new bird. I don't get to enjoy that so much anymore unless I really travel.
I'm glad you said you have a list of birds. Do you mind sharing some of what those are and why?
Yeah, listing is kind of funny. It all started in 1934 when Roger Tory Peterson published a list of birds in his book right in the front and called it My Life List. And one of his later editions fell into my hands when I was a kid, so I started checking them off. Nowadays, there's an American Birding Association that determines what is listable, for an official list if anyone wants to go by some kind of a scorecard. Because some birds may be exotic escapes and things like that, and you wouldn't want to count them. You can't go to a zoo and count them. So they have to be wild, free, unrestrained, and local to that area. So the ABA, American Birding Association, determines that. Then the American Ornithological Society determines what is a bird, because taxonomic changes happen fairly routinely. Every year, there's probably some changes to what species are. They split them or lump them. They decide what they had as two different species is actually one. And then they'll sometimes split species into two or three, which they just do regularly. So we have this dynamic going on where the list can change on you, even when you're sitting on the couch.
Yeah, I had no idea that it would change that much. Birds strike me as very much like a set list, but that is stunning to me.
No, it is not. And it's very annoying sometimes. Like warbling vireo, if you walked around any of the marshes really in the Bangor area, you'll hear warbling vireo. And it's a relatively common bird here in the right places. It's even more common out west. Well, this last year, they split them. They decided the one in the east is different than the one in the west, and now there's two different species. So all of a sudden, I picked up a species while I was just sitting on the couch because I'd seen them out west.
It's a pretty good way to do it, I guess. Easier.
Well, then they lumped back together, the redpoll and the hoary redpoll. So I lost a species doing that. So it's kind of a funny business.
You mentioned, fishing and other things. Do birders hold on to kind of secret places to go see the best birds the way fishermen seem to do with best places to fish, or is it much more open society kind of thing?
It's much more open. I think there's just an awful lot of sharing. There's no point in having a secret area unless it's a very sensitive bird. But if it's a local resident bird, it's probably not that sensitive. It's not the only one. And some of the most secretive, sensitive birds, nobody can find anyway. So we don't really have secret spots. It's much more of a sharing process. And that's why Maine Audubon does so many bird walks in the area. And I started the Maine Birding Trail, which documented all the great places you can go birding in Maine. So, no, it's very much sharing.
That was my guess. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't leading myself astray with thinking that. So I know you're on the Maine Board of Environmental Protection, and I'm curious, you come at it from a perspective that a lot of other people on that do not have, in that one passion was media, and now it's birding. Both of those are kind of all-encompassing in their own way. I'm just curious how it is for you to be part of a really important state board with a perspective that's so different. What does that feel like?
It's really not that different. We have a wildlife biologist, field ecologist on the board as well. So he knows a lot of the science. We have retired Maine State geologist. So a lot of us bring some kind of scientific or nature background to it. But we also have a city manager and a city planner or town planner on too. So the whole point of the Board of Environmental Protection is to have an assortment of skills on it and perspectives that represent more than what just the regulators would bring to the board. I was in the Maine House of Representatives for 6 terms, and all of them on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. So when Governor Mills asked me to serve on the board, she said, "You're probably familiar with some of the problems." And I said, "Yeah, I probably caused some of the problems."
Yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't entirely accurate to say you don't have the same background. It's just I was looking at who was on the board, and I was thinking it was a really interesting mix because probably the biggest link you have is as a former legislature, but that is a totally different angle than being on that Board of Protection. You just have a different experience, which I think is ideal when you have a system like that, is to have many different viewpoints.
It has been helpful. Most of the issues I do kind of understand. I certainly have a pretty good idea what the statute says and what we're supposed to do. So that has not been a challenge.
Okay, do you have a favorite place that you would pick for someone to try out birding in Maine? Like, would you say absolutely 100% go into the forest areas or hit Acadia for the coastal stuff or go down to southern Maine where it's a totally different kind of coastal experience? Or does it not matter because it's also good?
Frankly, it's also good. And that has a lot to do with what the state of Maine is like. You look at some of the other states. First of all, we have a coastline that's so uneven and broken that if you stretched all that out, it's bigger than California's, where saltwater hits land. So you've got that. We've got a coastline and mountains. You really can't say that about southern New England. They don't certainly have mountains to the extent that northern New England does. If you're in Fort Kent, you are north of most Canadians.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Think about that. In fact, if you're in Bangor, I think you're north of most Canadians because you've got the big cities of Toronto, Montreal, etc., Ottawa, all south of our latitude. So Maine, because it is surprisingly large, East Coast state, stretching so far north into what would otherwise be Canada, we have a lot of northern forest birds that most other states can't brag about until you get into like Montana or Alaska or something like that. So we have a tremendous amount of variety. You look at the coast, it's sandy beaches in southern Maine, then rocky shore as you get further up. So the diversity in the state is huge, and therefore the bird population is very diverse.
Do you have a favorite bird?
Spruce grouse.
Because?
Because they are just so tame. And males will go back to the same spot every year. It's their favorite lovemaking spot, and they will defend it. And you can get to know individual grouse personally. So I've got about 15 grouse in the state that I've given names to. And I'll go back and visit them regularly when I get the chance. And they can be such clowns because they are so tame.
That's so interesting. What's their lifespan?
Probably about 7 years as an old grouse. One of the most exuberant grouse I ever saw. Got past 7 years and haven't seen him since. But oh my God, he would follow you all over.
Are there birds that you would not want to cross paths with up close?
Yes, an American goshawk.
I don't know what that is.
Yep, it's a hawk. Well, it was the Accipiter family, but it's a large hawk that is able to chase down other birds in flight, but also snowshoe hares and that sort of thing. It's about the size of a large red-tailed hawk. They are absolutely fierce around their nest. If you wander into their territory, they'll give you a few warning shots, and if you don't heed their screams to get out, they'll rake you.
That's really interesting. I thought you were going to say a bald eagle.
No, I don't know if bald eagles attacking. Great horned owls will, but bald eagles, I think they're too big to fear anything.
Maybe that's it. Yeah. I got to go to the Iowa State Fair a couple of years back with my son and my husband, and there was someone who had raptors, and they had a bald eagle who was blind, actually, because of eating lead shot. But it was really interesting to see how massive that bird was. Like, I didn't appreciate how big a bald eagle is until it was right there in front of me.
Yeah, they are really surprisingly big.
All right, so how about the peregrine falcons on Acadia? Those are ones that strike me as very much kind of people's introduction into birds because of the live cams that are set up, which I think has probably been really helpful. Do you think things like that, like the live cameras and introducing people to kind of birds in their natural habitat, has helped people get more interested in birding?
I think so. The cameras especially, I mean, they've always been charismatic birds. So we do it with eagles, we do it with ospreys, puffins, Atlantic puffins, there are live cams on them. And then we're starting to see them in smaller bird boxes like tree swallows. We have a camera at Fields Pond Audubon Center in a tree swallow nest. And now you have these bird feeders with cameras right on them that you can put on your own home window. So people are using this kind of visual ability to get more excited about the natural world. Cameras are essentially bringing some birds closer.
You must use or recommend the Cornell app. My brother has recently gotten into birding, and he has decided it's the Shazam of bird apps. Shazam is this great app that you can do. If you don't know a song that's on the radio, you can do Shazam and it'll tell you the song. And I have found it really useful as a tool and another good introduction. So do you know of other apps like that that could help people get into birding?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is Merlin.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. Thank you.
Yes, Merlin. Yeah. And it's not controversial for the most part. There are some advanced birders who say you shouldn't rely on it, and they're right, because it's making an educated guess, but it's wrong regularly, and I don't care. It's right often enough. I think it's a really helpful tool so long as you don't get dependent on it. You have to remember that it is wrong sometimes. You can't trust it to give you an accurate answer, but most of the time it is right. I do a YouTube channel. I actually took a Merlin into Bangor City Forest and competed with it to see if I could find the birds and more birds than it could. And I beat it because I can hear farther than Merlin can.
Oh, this is great. We're going to link to that specific video on the show notes so people can watch you beat Merlin. That's really cool.
But I think one of the things that's really valuable is we have birds that come to our bird feeders, and we can get familiar with chickadees and nuthatches and goldfinches. But there are so many birds that don't come to the feeders that are lurking all around the yard that people wouldn't necessarily know unless the song tipped them off. And I think Merlin is very helpful to just tell you what the common birds are around. It's not going to screw up.
Yeah, so what does it usually not do well? More rare birds?
Birds, like people, have variable voices and variable abilities to sing. And some birds can sound very much like other birds. The first time I ever tried Merlin, I was watching a palm warbler sing, which is kind of a loose, rattly trill. You can hear that at the Orono Boardwalk most of the summer. But it's kind of like an orange-crowned warbler from the West. And that's what Merlin told me this palm warbler was, as I was watching the palm warbler sing. And that was my first experience with it. So I said, okay, got to be a little careful with this.
I would think it's actually pretty good to have your first experience with it be not quite accurate so that you realize it's a tool that is not foolproof.
Well, it's gotten to the point, I think it's so pervasive and should be, because it's a useful tool if used correctly, that I enjoy it when people bring Merlin along with them when I'm leading a bird walk, because I will argue with Merlin, and Merlin will sometimes contradict me and be right. So it really kind of amuses people.
Do you find bird walks in the wintertime to be as loud of an experience? Do you know what I mean? Winter strikes me as such a quieter time.
You would think, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, maybe it's because I'm so loud when I'm out and about in the winter.
Right. Obviously, there's not the bird song, but there are birds making noise. We have a phenomenon, really, where, birds go south for the winter. If you're an Arctic breeding bird or subarctic in Canada, Maine is your summer home in winter, but they're very eruptive. These are birds that of the northern forest that eat a lot of seeds and pine cones and cones like that. So some years they come down, some years they don't. But finches are just unbelievably noisy. Finches and grosbeaks, they come down in some winters, but not others. When they come down, the noise is off the charts loud. You go up in the North Maine woods around some sprucey areas, and it's unbelievably loud. And this comes right down into Bangor. You can get them up over Bangor City Forest, Orono campus of the university, around the ornamental gardens. They'll swarm in there sometimes. So finches really liven up the winter. Other birds come down. If you get out on a blueberry barren, snow buntings will sometimes gather there. Right now, American pipits are passing through, and a flock of 100 will be out in a fallow farm field. So all that activity actually is going on after the songbirds leave for the tropics. And then, because the north is frozen, we have a lot of sea ducks that come down to the Maine coast for the winter because it's not frozen. So if you go to the right places, into the woods or off into the coastal areas, birding is almost as exciting as it is right in the heart of summer.
I would think it would also be quieter because you have people like me who think there's not much there, so you get the place to yourself.
Well, it's also winter, so how many people want to go to the coast and walk along the Loop Road in Acadia National Park? Not as many as they would in the summer.
That's true, yeah. I mean, I personally think it's one of the best times to be there.
The only time to be there. Why go in the summer? I don't want to fight that crowd. I got other places to go.
I feel like I'm missing the opportunity to ask you a question, but I can't quite get what it would be. I mean, you've carved out this really remarkable career path with birds and made people really passionate about them, whether they go out and bird or not. And you said it's one of your many passions. I'm curious, like, how many days out of the year do you think you are out and about being able to pursue this now?
Well, I would say almost every day because I'm curious about the backyard birds. One of the things a pandemic did for me is to make me and most other people realize we're stuck at home. What's out in the backyard? And it's been fun for me to watch my own common birds and how they actually interact with each other, how they behave. And I've come to realize that's their living room and kitchen out there, and they know my yard better than I do. So I can actually now appreciate how they work the neighborhood. And they just go in flocks from, yard to yard, scavenging around because they go with each other so they can avoid predators a little easier. And all these behaviors are going on all in my backyard that I never really spent enough time enjoying before. So now I will walk out with my first cup of coffee in the morning earlier in the year just to hear what's singing. See if anything has popped in overnight, if anything rare is out there singing. And I'll do that right until they stop singing about mid-July.
That's pretty great. Yeah, I think the pandemic is how it really cemented being outside and hiking because we could do it in a really safe way. And that's when I first started thinking about it.
Hiking, camping, canoeing, everything. Basically, it all picked up during the pandemic because it was what you could do instead of going out to a movie.
Okay, if you could travel anywhere in the world and spend 2 weeks there for birding, where would it be?
I did it in Arizona last year, and that was awesome. I got about 30 birds I'd never seen before. And there's no place else in the U.S. that I can do that now because that was the last bastion of birds I hadn't seen. I would easily go back to Alaska and spend 2 weeks there. That was just awesome. I did the boat trips and everything, and I piled up a whole bunch of birds I'd never seen before there. I am sort of a northern forest guy. I really like, once you get into the spruce fir forest of northern Maine and Canada, I really very much get into that. So probably I would be a northern guy. If I had to pick where my 2 weeks would be, probably Alaska.
That's so many other reasons also to go to Alaska besides the birds, right? I mean, you hit so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bob, this has been just a delight to talk to you. It's actually gotten me thinking that I should reload Merlin and reintroduce myself to paying attention to what's around me. I've gotten to the point where I can identify a few of the simple common birds and gauge what time of year it is by when I hear them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I grew up in upstate New York, and mourning doves are the ones that I recognized from growing up that I hear here all the time. And it's kind of interesting. Almost as much as a smell, it takes me back to certain points of my childhood, just hearing that sound.
Yeah, and these sounds are going on. There's a lot of singing that happens in the spring, but there's a lot of calling that happens in the fall because they're in flocks together usually, and they keep the flock together by talking to each other, and I eavesdrop. And I suggest everybody else do that too.
Yeah. I'm going to selfishly ask you, it would be so cool if you feel compelled to take all of these notes and share with everyone in a larger forum than a weekly column, which I enjoy, kind of your observations of the backyard, living room, kitchen area. It would be a really fascinating way for people who are not familiar with it to get a deeper dive into the kind of everyday life of birds.
Yeah, I've had that noodling in my back of my mind for a while. It'd be a fascinating video. I'm not sure if it would be boring for people to just have a birder go out in his backyard, but it's an opera out there. It's a 3-act play, and unless you're paying attention, you wouldn't notice it.
I think it could be boring for some people. I have a really hard time imagining that you would have it be boring. Talking about it as a 3-act play right there, you've already got it framed out. I think it would be really cool.
Well, I'm working on a video right now that would be what expert birders get wrong when advising beginners.
Oh, this would be great. Excellent. All right, Bob, I really appreciate this. We're going to include a bunch of these links in the show notes so people can find out even more.
Terrific. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Maine Science Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by following us on your podcast platform of choice. And please leave a rating and review. It will help more people find us and help spread the word about some of the remarkable people doing science in Maine. The Maine Science Podcast is recorded at Discovery Studios at the Maine Discovery Museum in Bangor, Maine. Maine Science Podcast is executive produced and hosted by me, Kate Dickerson, and edited and produced by Scott Loiselle. And the Discover Maine theme was composed and performed by Nick Parker.